I'm really happy to be here, and it's funny to hear you say, indeed, we ended up in the future and then went back to the archives. And it's something that I always say to my students as well, because I'm currently also a teacher at the University of Amsterdam, where I'm involved in archival science. So I'm also always saying them, it's like the archive is really not about the past, it's really about the future. Because all these things might be collected now in order to build a past, but it's really looking at the future that you think these documents are going to be useful for. So the archive is about the future. It's my first statement of today, I suppose. But I have to say, of course, I mean, everyone knows archives, you know, their history is really much belonging to the realm of the large institutions. It's national governments, that's where archives, in a way, originated from. And it was an attempt to collect all kinds of records, documents, like letters, official papers, photograph, recorded material, computer files. It's really to build a historical consciousness, but with the purpose of a future. So in a time when the creation of documents and also the assemblage in a way and the aggregation in all sorts of different and especially online archives has become a part of everyday life now, the role and the function of archives, I assume, is changing, and that's something that I want to discuss here. And it's discussing through modes of iterations, appropriation, copying, leaking, and all kinds of other permutations that archives, I believe, can really short-circuit, defy and disrupt. And it's really emphasizing the limits of historical representation. So I will explore some of these sort of messy entanglements of the way documents are created and collected, systems function and dysfunction, and how networks of people, bots, and algorithms trigger transformations. So I think from the few presentations I heard just now, I think there's some interesting crossovers to be made, and hopefully also productive ones. In the process of my presentation, in a way, I'm trying also to answer what the consequences are for digital archives on the meaning and value of archives, and what the role could be of the archivist in this new sort of environment. Now, as some of you might recognize, around about 10 years ago, the term living archive started to pop up and became quite popular, due to the increase of digitization methods and the possibilities of new interface design, which made it really possible to much easier and provide access to previously closed archives, quote-unquote closed. But the term living archives is actually much older. It already originated in the 70s, in a way, when the real thinking about new archives really came up, and concerning the nature of archives was really under discussion. People wanted to integrate multiple voices within the archives, and there were new techniques and methods of oral history and oral cultures that really entered into the archives, and that's where the living archives as a term, in a way, already originated. So this sort of coincided with a much wider concern, in a way, of course, of social progress. The great provost protest examples that we've already seen by Dirk are part of that change, of that sort of new paradigm, you could almost say. So the living archive, in that sense, was founded on a problem that most traditional archives were organized through selection, inclusion, and especially exclusion, thereby really giving a lot of agency, in a way, to the archivist, the system and the archival system and the institution. And as Canadian archivist Terry Cook mentioned, the archivist is in that sense a very active agent, shaping the archive. It's a mediator and interpreter of meanings. And Eric Ketelaar, also quite a prominent professor of archival science at the University of Amsterdam, he adds to that the records themselves really have no power, but it's through their use and interpretation and recontextualization that they become powerful tools. And moreover, in a way, and as also stressed actually by Terry Cook, record keeping is as much about social practices and communication dynamics as about rule-guided system for information artifacts. So archives are about context, communication, and power. Now, this way of thinking is becoming very important, I believe, in the relation to a living archive. Because this archive is completely focused on access, in a way, and on reuse through systems of communication and social practices. As such, it's particularly visible in online environments. And while this is not really new, as I will show, the online archive has brought many new voices that act and assert agency. So, in general, in a way, some of the characteristics of online archives, I'm just briefly mentioning them here: openness, self-reference, and the shift from passive audience to active audiences. So this is nothing super new. I think we're all kind of used to that now. So it's not that the visitor attention alone shifts from sort of physical to a sort of quote-unquote virtual environment, but it's also that then the contact with objects changed, where you would used to go into an archive and get physical material in your hands. A computer database has quite a different feel to it, I suppose. Maybe not, but for some people they do, some people they don't. I won't go into that. If we go with media scientist Wolfgang Ernst, takes us a step further in a way, and he describes that the emphasis in the digital shifts really from documenting a single event to redevelopment, in which a document is constantly co-produced by different users. In this sense, you could say that online data collections could in fact be better characterized as being in perpetual transmission, rather than as permanent storage. So there's a continuous dynamic to these documents, rather than what we've learned from the archive, that those are like static places, well, which is also debatable, of course. Anyway, what really is important in this sense is that the source often remains intact, as also in the original archive. Its existence, in a way, is constantly shifting and changing and dynamic, some say. And to show what this means, I will show you some examples of a project that I was part of up till now, I suppose. I just finished, actually, officially. And I was asked, actually, by the new Instituut in Rotterdam to curate a research project, New Archive Interpretations. And over a 2-year period, more or less, they allowed me to investigate the challenges and the opportunities of digital archiving. Now, first of all, they asked me to help them with their digital archive, because they just had received a digital archive and they weren't sure what to do with it. And I was like, well, I can tell you what to do with it, but that's not really my interest. I'd much rather speculate on what digital archiving could mean. And I don't want to do this by myself. I just want to commission other people that really do good speculation and then see what happens. And luckily, they agreed. And they gave me a bit of money to commission 5 different projects. And within those projects, I really questioned the value of this online archive and how it could be useful. And also how it could be different, how it could be seen different from the sort of traditional archive. And one of my aims, in a way, was that I really wanted to see how can we tackle these sort of traditional things like authority, authorship, regulation, and copyrights. How can we tackle those within an online environment? And also, how can we reassess those if that's needed or not? So, this is the website of the new Instituut. And just to give you a bit of background briefly, the new Instituut actually came from, originated in a way as an accumulation of 3 different institutes. And one of the main the main archive is from an architecture museum, which was set up, I don't even know when. Anyone know? Some years ago. Huh?
Mid-90s?
I have no idea, really.
Nederlands Architectuur Instituut.
Yeah, probably, yeah. or earlier, I don't know. Anyway, the archive really dates back to the mid-19th century, so it's a bit older than the Institute. And it consists of all kinds of materials, from ink drawings on paper, large plans on chalk paper, miniature buildings, or complete infrastructures even in foam, wood, or plastic. And of course, many photos and videos of all kinds of formats. And as I said, it's only recently, really 2 years ago, that they acquired digital material. And this raised many questions, from the sort of practical ones of how do we recognize these files, how do we appraise them, how do we select them, how do we categorize them within our existing databases, or do we need new management systems? That was all fine, I thought. It's like I'm more interested in more conceptual questions. And some of the initial questions were like these. What are the consequences on the content of the archive when physical collections are being digitized? To what extent does a digital archive function differently? Will the links between works and documents become clearer? Will insight into the past and present be advanced in some way or another? So, as I said, we commissioned several different people, and one of the first ones was Richard Vijgen. He's a designer in Holland. He's teaching in Arnhem at the Arts Academy there in graphic design or interaction design. And we asked him to connect to the theme of an exhibition that was taking place at the time around structuralism. And Richard was actually really interested in it because his design practice is really dealing with big data and making structures in big data. So he went and investigated a little bit into structuralism, and he found actually quite a few comparisons between their mode of working and his approach to big data. And so we asked him to really focus on the Institute's record-keeping system, much more than archival documents, but much more on the system, because we were quite interested in how a system actually already, designates the use in a way. So you have a system, a database system or a management system, and that already within all the file, the things you have to fill in, everything already tells you something about what information will come out or what will not come out. So the record-keeping system is called AdLib, and that's a software package very well used in most museum collections and archival collections. It sort of categorizes, it localizes, and internally links all the objects that the Institute houses in its collection. So he was really asked to explore the extent to which this record-keeping system influenced the content and use of the archive. Now, you could say, of course, quite obviously, that any archival system will influence the form of an archive and how it's used. With his pilot project, the Data Volume Explorer, Richard decided to focus on the structuring principles of the record-keeping system. And he experimented with new interfaces to see what and how this would affect the understanding of archival documents. And it's really one of his interests, as he also said, that the quality of digital information is that you can continually rearrange it. There's millions of possibilities, as you probably also quite well known. And every change will imbue it with new meaning, so you get constantly new references and new context give new meaning to the documents. So for him, it was really important to design an interface that would allow the user to have, without really specific knowledge, to browse through the system in a sort of playful way, to play with the information that is contained in the database. So he came up with this physical, he took inspiration from the physical boxes, the carton boxes that are like in the archive where all the documents are placed in. And he came up with a sort of spatial metaphor in 3D that you could just play through the content of the archive. And here is a sort of simulation of it, and every box can be turned around and put upside down. It gives the volume and the weight of the material that's inside it, and you can make all kinds of structures of it. So it's both a sort of playful playground in a way, and also a new way of how can people come to new information constantly. So yeah, I mean, like I said before, the content never really changed, but the way of access really made a difference, and hopefully would give people new insight in what happens. Now, and of course, with the emergence of more and more sophisticated visualization, 3D and printing techniques, it has really the potential that technology can make any digital object in a way accessible anywhere, anytime. And at the same time, it reaffirms that the working of the database and also the interface cannot be taken for granted. Such a tool will always impact the policy of an institution in various and at times also unexpected ways. So a critical attitude and understanding of their working is crucial. And this seems like a super obvious statement in a way, but when I started this project, one of the first questions of the Institute was really, to me, it's like, oh yeah, we would like to have all kinds of new ways of thinking about accessibility. And I'm just like, yeah, but you can have 1,000 different interfaces. It won't do much. It will always give you a nice, beautiful interface, and then what do? We have beautiful visualizations, etc., but we don't bring any solutions. It doesn't really bring us anything different than what we already have. So in the second project, we wanted to focus much more on the consequences of this increased access and accessibility to archival documents. So inspired by this user interface, we asked graphic design studio Template, Marlon Harder and Lasse van der Bos, a Rotterdam-based studio, to trace the museum's online activity. And they noticed that the Institute actually uploaded many of its digitized images on Flickr Commons. Now, that's of course not very uncommon. Many institutes do that. They all upload their images on Flickr Commons and they're free to use and do whatever you want with it. But there seems to be very little awareness of what could potentially happen to these images. And following the mantra in a way of openness and accessibility, they gave really little thought to the still very vague terms and conditions of Flickr Commons. Anything can really be done to the documents that are uploaded. Now, on the one hand, Template was really interested in the interface of Flickr Commons. They present this vast amount of images that's infinitely scrollable and provides you with an extremely fragmented image collage. And so rather than offering the original context of the document that's shown, it gives you completely a new context and also meaning. Now, in most cases, an archivist has a lot of contextual information about documents that he has in his collection, which of course is very hard to replace within the digital environment. It becomes really a lot of work to describe all these things next to the photo or image that's there. So rather than trying to translate that sort of knowledge in a digital environment, we wanted to explore other ways of using and perhaps also abusing the content, which is now void of context. As they explained themselves, we wanted to comprehend how institutions are dealing with their digital archives, especially when publishing the content online. And also they wanted to confront them with what could actually potentially happen to these things. So in the process, they reflected on the changing attitude towards images online. And again, they said, like, archives in a way are transforming from places where memories are kept to databases, in which the present and near future are becoming more important. It's all about the now, presenting and sharing your or other people's images with friends and strangers alike. So in other words, you could say, when images are presented as one endless flow, the archival context becomes less important, perhaps, in favor of form and ease of distribution. Now, another important point in Flickr Commons is their uses of descriptions, categories, and keywords that is very much based on taxonomies, emphasizing really the user's input. And so, in that sense, the archive is no longer related to singular objects, but meaning is really generated through tagging. And perhaps, in a way, you could debate indeed if this is similar to oral culture, where events and histories are now retold in different ways. So another topic that came up in the research was the use of these commercial platforms, of course, and the consequences of this open content. What really happens when one gives away the content to a commercial business, which then becomes the co-owner, in a way, of that material? So to answer this question, Template set up their own business, Pretty Old Pictures. It was a sort of tongue-in-cheek comment, and they decided to present some of their potential consequences of this openness, this unclear copyright and ownership legislation, in a very playful way, by selling and repackaging the curated collections from the Flickr Commons. And you could upload, you make selections, you upload them, and you start selling them to anyone that's interested in really nicely packaged and curated selections, which you can see here. And these were actually sold also in the shop of the new Institute, so they were sort of repurposing every element of this sort of commercial side of it. While addressing these characteristics in a way of many online archives, their openness, self-referential, and the shift from passive to active audience, Template really presented the potential consequences of openness, this unclear copyright and ownership, in a very playful way. Now, for the third commission, we wanted to focus on the creators of archival documents, and in particular their online archival activities. It's often said that we are all archivists, like we are all curators, and we're all everything, basically. Everyone collects, selects, stores books, writes objects, makes photographs, films, audio recordings, video. And this has, of course, given rise to statements about the democratization, so-called, of archival practices, which allows individuals, communities, and organizations to document, preserve, share, and promote stories and heritage. But what actually happens when someone wants to collect their online digital material? You spread it all over the web, and now you want to get it back. Then what happens? From the previous commission, we learned that digital systems influence the way archival documents are used and perceived. But what now if you turn this process around? So we commissioned Greek-English artist Erika Skorti to explore the ways in which these online storage faults, such as Google Photo, YouTube, or Flickr, and their auto-editing software and data processing algorithms affect the data of the individual users. And she came up with the project Dark Archives. For this project, she uploaded her entire 15-year-old personal media archive, consisting of photos, videos, screenshots to Google Photo here. And this platform is really interesting, and you probably all know about this, but it has something called Assistant. And one of the things it does is searching for similarities in your photos. So, for example, often you take several photos of the same instance, because, well, people were not smiling, or they closed their eyes when you just push the button and stuff like that. So you have like a series of photos. And what Assistant does, they bring it all together and make a nice GIF animation out of it. And that's what you can see again on Google Photo. So it detects these images that are similar, and when possible, they can also stitch them together as little panoramas. So you have like nice landscape panoramas. So it's beautiful. But of course, you don't really know what they're doing to detect your images, how they search for these images, let alone all the other things they might do to them. So it's a very weird process. It's fun, but it's also like, okay. Now, the project is called Dark Archive, and that was for several reasons. In general, that term is actually used to indicate a repository for information that can be used as a fail-safe after a sort of big disaster, as a sort of metadata recovery. And Erika, though, was really interested in the other type of dark archives, the information in an archive that cannot be seen. So imagine you all know Amazon. Amazon could be described as a very light archive. What do I mean here? The business model of Amazon is very much based, of course, on retrievability. Because if they can't find anything, they can't sell it. So they need to retrieve all the information they have in their database in order to sell it. So it's very light in that sense. It's really battling in a way against the forces of darkness, which threaten to make the things unfindable. And it's actually quite easy to get unfound. There's multiple instances of similar titles, the same titles even, and they just disappear, things like that. So it's all these things that they want to counter. And there's spam included, of course, within the database as well, so you get all these things that you want to get rid of as much as possible. So there is this real hard need for most businesses to keep things retrievable, otherwise the content falls into darkness. They are available, but you can't find them anymore. Now, Erica wants to focus on how visibility and invisibility, or darkness, relate to archiving and archives. So after she uploaded her archive on Google Photo, she used the automatic video editor to generate small videos. And I'll show you briefly while I just talk over it. This is actually a final step that she took, in which she involved also elements of staging, the scripting and fictionalizing. She actually invited a group of writers to speculate and caption what they imagined to be the missing sets of media that somehow evaded the classification within her archive. So the false negatives, the misclassification, all the media that fell out of Google's definition for that search term. So that's quite a lot. And she asked the writers to imagine a way the algorithm works and to fill in the holes, the gaps. So the project in a way is trying really hard to get at the core of what perhaps could be seen as a sort of non-human way of thinking or logic. These captions then are used to create this new series of videos that you see here. And you can access them on your smartphone at the new Instituut, or you could at least. You can at the moment still actually, because they just opened a new exhibition yesterday where this is shown again, so you can still see them. So in a way she's going from the machine algorithms, like Google and these automated video things, to asking the writers to imagine the way an algorithm works. And so the project tries to get at the core of what perhaps this non-human, as I said, way of thinking or logic could be. But it also relates to her interest in identity and memory, and how traces become meaningful through technology. And she explains here that I'm particularly interested in the traces that we make all the time without being necessarily conscious about it, and how the technologies that we are entangled with are recording and archiving our lives. On the one hand, this refers to notions of how identity and memory are constructed, but it also relates to how new technology are inscribing knowledge in different ways. The project as a whole shows how the significance and meaning of identity and memory partly derive from these technical infrastructures, but also their production modes. And it also shows that the online archive is really never stable, especially when using these automated editing systems or even certain platforms. The archive really is always added to. It depends on the search active changes and constantly makes changes in your findings. So the archive and the potentially limitless constellations within it will have always this sort of unfinished and semi-fictional quality to it. But then we asked ourselves, okay, what happens now? What happens to the people who create these documents? How are they made visible within archival systems? And so we used actually the Born Digital archive of the Dutch-based architecture and urban design firm, MVRDV, as an example to investigate the presence and role of human hardware in a way to archival documents and documentation systems. And we approached for this assignment George Oost. She's an interaction designer in digital archives and a specialist in in all kinds of online archival and database systems. She also worked on the interface for Flickr Commons, so there was a nice relation within the different projects as well, in a way. Now, she states that the value of the digital archives becomes really clear at the point of creation, and she explains how it is possible to develop simple hooks that capture information automatically as one creates digital materials. As she mentions here, digital things have myriad data stamps. There's EXIF data in a digital photograph, for example. And that's almost an equivalent of a dated handwritten letter, but for each object. So as you know, if you take a photo with your mobile phone or with your digital camera, there's all these additional metadata that you get, and that's what she's alluding to. Now, thanks to this incredible pervasiveness, she continues, many of us are logging our daily lives, perhaps without particularly thinking about it too hard. And that volume and breadth of information of record is, of course, new in a life. It's a huge amount of information, not just about documents, but also metadata about documents, which is all automated. So indeed, if processes are recorded in real time, and that is what happens, it becomes easier to retrieve information in various ways, allowing also for new information and voices to appear. Yet, on the other hand, as described by Oates as well, many cultural search systems still expect you to know what you're looking for. So she proposes actually to give archival documents a sort of README file. You want to give archival documents a kind of surface area. So they don't sink into sort of invisibility. And the more points of entry you can give people, the more surface area the objects will have. Now, as I said just now, this could be a sort of README file that's quite common in software development, where you have a basic note that explains what the project is and how it came about. Well, this could be seen as a sort of traditional method of archival description. She also emphasizes the importance of small archives, or archives within archives, instead of large collection management systems that hold billions of entries. So, while arguing for the need for human intervention that describe things in multiple ways and for finding a way to feed this work back to the institution, she really emphasized exploring the methods behind these live data sets that can be browsed and looked at through the web, and how they can be used for archival purposes. Now, since a lot of data on the web is centered on liveness, or recentness, you could say, how could this method indeed be translated now to archival practices? What could a real-time live archive really be? What if archiving things was more a moment-by-moment task that just happens, but also might disappear again quite quickly? So I just want to briefly go into the last project that we did. And here she says that, she says what she says. Doesn't really matter. The idea is indeed, what would such a future archive be like, in which the role and the function of an archivist are really changing? Now, that question we've taken up in the final assignment, and it's become a game, and it's called What Remains. And it's a project by Aymeric Mansou and Marloes de Valk and several other people. And they've repurposed a Nintendo old game of the 80s, and the idea of media archaeology really remade this into a new game. And they decided to focus on the obsession with collecting, documenting, archiving, processing, interpreting everything you can think of that relates to archival processes. Now, the game's not finished yet, but there's some stills here, and what it really aims to do in a way is exploring how documents acquire new meaning in different contexts. Now, it's a very old question in many ways, but through the various relations and the social, legal, and technical implications, and how they can be used in different processes, or how documents are becoming part of a more continuum. Now, in the end, they've set up a sort of questionnaire and multiple choice quiz in a way, and which they portray the future archivist. And so you can do this quiz, and then you can see what kind of archivist you are. And I'm running out of time, so I won't really go into them, but I'll just give you the final long URL where you can do the quiz, and then you can see what kind of archivist will you be, or are you. Okay.